Welcome back to Void of Fears, where the line between nightmares and reality blurs with every story. Our community grows stronger with each brave soul who joins us. We're 8,000 deep now, creeping toward our goal of 10,000 subscribers by year's end. If you dare to continue this journey with us, hit that subscribe button now. Leave your mark with a like. Share your own encounters in the comments below. Now, let's begin today's story. The package arrived on a dreary Thursday afternoon. Rain pattered against my office window as I sliced through the brown paper wrapping. No return address, just my name and office location written in an elegant, flowing script. The most striking feature was the wax seal, dark crimson with an unfamiliar crest pressed into it depicting what appeared to be a tree encircled by 7 stars. I'm Thomas Blackwood, a dealer in rare manuscripts and antiquarian books. Unusual deliveries aren't uncommon in my line of work, but something about this package made my skin prickle with unease. Inside was a leather-bound journal, weathered and worn, alongside several loose photographs and newspaper clippings and a small USB drive. A handwritten note sat atop everything. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't have much time. They'll realize what I've taken soon, if they haven't already. What you hold in your hands is evidence of a truth so deeply buried that most who've uncovered it didn't live long enough to share it. I'm entrusting you with these journals because of your reputation for intellectual honesty and your connections in academic publishing. The Board of Immortals has guided human destiny since the collapse of the Roman Empire. I've infiltrated their inner circle and documented their existence, their methods, and their current crisis. They are not what they appear to be, neither fully human nor truly immortal anymore. I may not survive the week. Make this knowledge public. Eleanor Voss." I nearly dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, perhaps a manuscript for a horror novel submitted through the unusual channels. But then I examined one of the photographs more carefully. It showed a group of wealthy-looking individuals at some sort of gala in 1892, according to the handwritten note on its back. Standing somewhat apart from the group was a young woman with striking features and intelligent eyes. I compared this to a modern newspaper clipping also included in the package. The article, dated just last year, concerned the appointment of a new head archivist at Blackmere University's historical collection. The photograph showed the same woman, Eleanor Voss, unchanged despite the 131-year gap. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the journal and began to read. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting that occasionally dissolved into frantic scrawls, as if the writer had been seized by sudden urgency or fear. I poured myself a glass of scotch and settled in for what would prove to be the most disturbing reading of my life. Journal of Eleanor Voss, January 15th, 2023. My position at Blackmere's archives has finally paid off. The donation from the Harrington estate arrived today. 67 boxes of documents spanning 4 centuries of one of America's wealthiest families. Most of it is mundane, business ledgers, correspondence about investments, society invitations. But in box 44, I found something extraordinary. Letters between Ambrose Harrington and an organisation called the Preservation Society, dating from 1743 to 1789. The contents were odd enough, discussions of ensuring stability through the coming revolutionary period, with references to France and America years before their respective revolutions occurred. But what truly seized my attention were the signatures. The same 7 names appear throughout nearly 50 years of correspondence, with handwriting that shows no evolution or aging. This can't be coincidence. I've requested all available materials mentioning the Preservation Society from our general collection. I need to see if these names appear elsewhere. January 21st, 2023. Found more references in our collection. The Preservation Society appears in documents from at least 3 separate archives, always connected to moments of historical significance always operating just outside public view. I've identified what appear to be coded references to them in journals of politicians, generals, and industrialists spanning 2 centuries. The 7 names recur with slight variations. What's most intriguing is how they disappear from public record for decades at a time, then resurface unchanged. Normal people age, their handwriting evolves, their signatures develop tremors as they grow older, but these remain remarkably consistent. I've begun cross-referencing with portraits and photographs when available. The resemblances across time periods are uncanny. I'm either uncovering evidence of extremely long-lived individuals, or an organisation so secretive they select members with remarkably similar appearances to their predecessors. Tomorrow I'll check the university's collection of financial records. If this organisation has existed for centuries, they must have substantial economic resources. February 3rd, 2023. 3 weeks of research, and I can barely sleep. The same 7 individuals appear across centuries of historical documentation, always in proximity to momentous events, always wielding influence from the shadows. They change their names slightly from era to era. Augustus Thorne becomes Austin Thornhill, becomes Augustine Dawn, but their handwriting remains consistent. Their portraits, when I can find them, show only the most minor alterations, despite decades passing between them. My apartment walls are covered with evidence. I've tracked them through the Industrial Revolution, both world wars, the digital age, always 7, always positioned perfectly to guide human events without drawing attention to themselves. In more recent decades, they're more careful about photographs, but financial records show shell companies and foundations linking back to the same entities. They call themselves different things in different eras: the Preservation Society, the Historical Continuity Board, the Guidance Council, but a letter from 1942 finally gave me their true name: the Board of Immortals. Here's what I've pieced together about each member. Augustus Thorne, Thornhill Dawn controls vast financial interests. Financial panics, market crashes, economic booms all show evidence of his manipulation. During the Great Depression, his banks somehow remained solvent while others collapsed. His signature appears on the founding documents of 3 central banks on different continents. Victoria Essex, Langley, Winfield, operates in political spheres. Her name is conspicuously absent from official records, but she appears in the diaries and personal correspondence of prime ministers, presidents, and monarchs across centuries, always described as a trusted advisor or dear friend with remarkable influence. Dmitry Volkov, Volkmann, von Keller surfaces wherever scientific breakthroughs occur. His name appears in correspondence with Newton, Darwin, Einstein, sometimes encouraging their work, other times seemingly working to slow or redirect it. Several brilliant scientists throughout history mention him just before abandoning promising avenues of research. Isabelle Moreau, Maurice Murray influences cultural movements. Her patronage launched artistic careers, while ensuring others remained obscure. The Renaissance, Romanticism, Modernism all bear her fingerprints. Her striking beauty is mentioned consistently across centuries of description. Hiroshi Tanaka Takahashi Tamura emerges alongside technological developments. His investments and patents span from early industrial machinery to computer technology. He seems to carefully curate which innovations reach public use and which remain suppressed. Leonard Bishop, Bischoff Bessemer, guides religious institutions. His correspondence with church leaders shows a pattern of moderating extremism while maintaining religious influence over populations. Secular movements rise and fall according to patterns that, in retrospect, seem designed rather than organic. Edward Blackwell Blackwood, Blake, no relation to me that I know of, directs military affairs. His name is conspicuously absent from official military records, Yet generals and admirals mention him in private journals. Major conflicts seem shaped by his invisible hand, never allowing total victory or defeat, maintaining a careful balance of power. I need more evidence, but I'm becoming convinced these aren't just similar people across generations. They're the same individuals, somehow living far beyond normal human lifespans. February 18th, 2023. I found personal journals of Ambrose Harrington hidden within the collection. He describes meeting the board members multiple times between 1720 and 1789. In his final entry, written when he was 87 years old, he mentions being stunned that Augustus hadn't aged a day since their first meeting nearly 70 years earlier. More importantly, he references treatments provided by the board that extended his own life beyond what medicine of the time could explain. He died at 92, extraordinary for the 18th century. His journals mention side effects, sensitivity to light, dietary restrictions, and a peculiar growth his physicians couldn't identify. This suggests the board not only possesses the secret to extended life, but occasionally shares it with useful allies. I need to find more examples of these treatments and their outcomes. The pattern is becoming clearer. The board manipulates human affairs, not just across decades, but centuries. They nudge civilizations in specific directions, allowing progress, but controlling its pace and direction. But to what end? What is their ultimate purpose? March 12th, 2023. I found them. After months of tracing financial records and property holdings, I've located their headquarters, a remote Alpine fortress accessible only by private railway. Official records list it as the European headquarters of the Blackwell Foundation for Historical Preservation. More importantly, I found my way in. They're seeking a new archivist to catalogue and maintain their historical records. The job listing was circulated only among the most prestigious universities' history departments. My credentials are perfect. I've spent my career preserving and authenticating historical documents. I can use my genuine expertise while concealing my true purpose. My application was submitted today. If they accept me, I'll be walking into the lair of people who have manipulated human history for centuries. The risk is enormous, but the truth is worth it. This will be my last entry until I'm inside. If I'm accepted, I'll need to be extraordinarily careful with my documentation. If they are truly immortal, I need to discover how and why they've kept themselves hidden for so long. May 30th, 2023. I'm writing from my quarters in the Alpine headquarters of the board. The fortress is built directly into the mountainside, a masterpiece of engineering from multiple eras. Medieval stonework blending seamlessly with Victorian ironwork and modern technology. Windows look out over a breathtaking view of snow-capped peaks and valleys so deep they disappear into mist. The interview process was grueling. 5 separate sessions with different members, each probing not just my archival knowledge but my personality, my ethics, my views on human progress. I maintained my cover, presenting myself as a dedicated historian interested only in preserving the past. Today, I met all 7 board members together for the first time. They introduced themselves with modern names, but I know their true identities from my research. Augustus Thorne, appearing to be in his 60s, controls their financial empire. His hands bear the distinctive calluses of someone who wrote with quill pens for decades before transitioning to modern writing implements. I found evidence of him manipulating the East India Company as far back as 1682. In person, he exudes an aura of absolute authority, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who has witnessed centuries of human folly. His eyes, however, seem weary, ancient beyond his apparent years. Victoria Langley carries herself with the poise of someone who has moved in elite circles for centuries. I recognized her from portraits in the backgrounds of paintings of both Queen Elizabeth and Napoleon Bonaparte. She oversees their political influence. Her manner of speech is fascinating, a blend of modern vocabulary with occasional archaic phrasings she quickly corrects. She studies me with unsettling intensity, as though assessing my utility to their agenda. Dmitry Volkov, cold and analytical, directs their scientific interests. His name appears on suppressed research dating back to the early 1800s, always working to either advance or hinder scientific progress according to some agenda I don't yet understand. His knowledge spans disciplines that didn't exist as separate fields until recent decades. During my interview, he tested me with questions about document preservation techniques that won't be taught in universities for years. I recognized them from experimental research papers not yet published. Isabelle Moreau is breathtakingly beautiful, with perfect features that match descriptions in diaries of artists from the Renaissance onward. She has shaped cultural movements across centuries, promoting some artists while ensuring others remain obscure. Her beauty is almost painful to look at, too perfect, too symmetrical. Artists throughout history describe being simultaneously inspired and disturbed by her presence, and now I understand why. Something about her feels meticulously crafted, rather than naturally human. Hiroshi Tanaka appears youngest, perhaps 40, but correspondence places him advising Japanese leaders during the Meiji Restoration. He oversees their technological interests, his fingers constantly moving as though manipulating invisible strings. During my introduction, he was examining a device unlike any smartphone or tablet I've seen, with capabilities that suggest technology not yet available to the public. He dismissed my curious glance with practiced casualness. Leonard Bishop presents himself as a grandfatherly figure, his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. But those same eyes stare out from woodcuts of medieval religious figures. He has guided religious institutions throughout history. His manner is gentle, his voice soothing, yet something in his demeanour suggests he views humans as children to be guided, rather than equals to be respected. He asked the most probing questions during my interview, testing my moral frameworks and philosophical positions. Edward Blackwell is physically imposing, his bearing unmistakably military, despite his elegant suit. His handwriting matches war correspondence from conflicts spanning 4 centuries. He orchestrates their military strategies and intelligence networks. His assessment of me was most overt, studying my movements, my awareness of exits and sightlines, my physical capabilities. He seems constantly alert for threats, his eyes scanning even casual settings for potential dangers. They've granted me access to their archives, a vast underground complex containing documents I've only dreamed of seeing. My task is to organise and preserve centuries of their records. Little do they know I'll be documenting their secrets as I work. The staff here is minimal, a few dozen individuals who maintain the facility and serve the board. They avoid eye contact and speak little, moving through the corridors with practiced efficiency. None seem to stay for more than a few hours before departing via the railway. Do they know who they serve? June 7th, 2023. The archives exceed my wildest expectations. Original copies of texts I thought lost to history. First-hand accounts of events that contradict every history book. Technology diagrams annotated with delayed until 2040 inches or approved for limited release 2025. Most disturbing are the contingency plans, detailed strategies for handling every imaginable global crisis, from nuclear war to pandemics to climate collapse, all designed to preserve the board's control, regardless of human suffering. These aren't defensive measures for humanity's benefit, they're continuity plans for maintaining power through any catastrophe. I've been cataloguing diligently, gaining their trust while studying their methods. Augustus visits most frequently, reviewing financial records spanning centuries. Victoria retrieves political correspondence before important global summits. Each member accesses the archives for their domain of influence, rarely crossing into others' areas of expertise. I've started mapping the facility during my off hours. The main structure consists of 10 levels, carved into the mountainside, with the archives occupying the middle floors. The board members' personal quarters occupy the upper levels, while staff facilities and infrastructure systems fill the lowest floors. But there are inconsistencies in the layout. Elevator buttons for floors that don't appear on any directory. Corridors that end abruptly as though hiding something beyond. Something else troubles me. The staff change constantly, but their behaviour is eerily similar, like actors playing the same roles. They never discuss personal lives or engage beyond their duties. Their movements seem choreographed, efficient to the point of unnaturalness, and occasionally I notice them watching me when they think I'm absorbed in my work. June 14th, 2023. The archives are beyond anything I could have imagined. Shelf after shelf of histories never made public, original manuscripts of books altered before publication, technological designs centuries ahead of their time, deliberately suppressed. The board doesn't just influence history, they actively curate human knowledge and progress. I've maintained my cover, diligently cataloguing and organising the collection. The board members visit occasionally, retrieving specific documents or artifacts. They treat me with polite distance, but I sense they're still evaluating me. Today, I discovered something odd. While reorganising a section of financial records, I found repeated references to shipments of a substance called simply the Elixir. The shipments go to each board member monthly, with quantities increasing over time for each recipient. The source is listed only as the Garden. I need to discover what this substance is and its connection to their longevity. Most intriguing was a ledger tracking these shipments back to 1580, over 440 years of continuous distribution. The earliest entries were in a form of Middle English, gradually modernising over centuries of record keeping. The pattern is clear. Each board member's allocation increases over decades, then centuries. Augustus, apparently the oldest, receives nearly triple the amount allocated to Hiroshi, the youngest. Another discovery, correspondence between Leonard and religious leaders, shows an organised effort to discredit or eliminate alchemists and others searching for immortality throughout history. They systematically removed competitors while preserving the secret for themselves. June 22nd, 2023. I've begun exploring beyond the archives during night hours when most staff have departed. The lower levels contain laboratories with equipment both antique and futuristic. Documentation suggests ongoing research into human longevity, genetic manipulation, and consciousness transfer, all operating outside any regulatory oversight. More troubling are the storage facilities. Climate-controlled rooms hold thousands of biological samples dating back centuries. Blood, tissue, DNA from historical figures, preserved with technology that shouldn't have existed when they were collected. Labels indicate regular extraction for compatibility testing and heritage verification. I found medical records for the board members documenting a condition they call cellular restoration resistance. It appears their immortality is neither perfect nor permanent. They require increasing treatments to maintain their extended lives, with concerning side effects they're struggling to mitigate. Most disturbing was a room containing personal effects, clothing, jewellery, photographs, organised by decade but belonging to people I've never heard of. Each collection includes medical records and ends with a death certificate. The most recent addition was from just last month. What connection do these people have to the board? Are they failed experiments, predecessors, victims? I need to be more careful. Twice now, I've nearly encountered security patrols during my explorations. The staff may seem docile, but the security personnel move with predatory alertness. I've started documenting everything with the miniature camera I smuggled in, backing up the files to a hidden drive in my quarters. July 3rd, 2023. I followed Augustus last night. After dinner, while the others retired to their quarters, he took a hidden elevator deep below the main archive level. I waited 10 minutes, then called the elevator back and followed. The doors opened onto a vast cavern, artificially expanded and reinforced over what must have been centuries. The air was thick with the scent of loam and something else, metallic and organic simultaneously. Bioluminescent fungi grew along the walls, providing dim blue-green light. Augustus had disappeared, but I advanced carefully through the cavern until I found an area that could only be described as a garden, row upon row of the glowing fungi, carefully cultivated in stone troughs filled with a substance I couldn't identify. I nearly screamed when a hand touched my shoulder. It was Leonard, his kind face solemn in the eerie light. "Curiosity is natural, Eleanor," he said quietly, "but some knowledge is dangerous when acquired too quickly." He didn't seem angry, merely resigned. He explained that what I was seeing was the source of their longevity, a rare fungal species that grows only in specific conditions they've carefully maintained for centuries. They consume it in processed form as the elixir. He was surprisingly forthcoming, though I suspect he told me only what he wanted me to know. He claimed they see themselves as stewards of humanity, using their extended lives to guide our species through our most self-destructive tendencies. I asked why they keep themselves secret if their intentions are benevolent. His answer chilled me. Humans fear what they don't understand, and they destroy what they fear. I don't believe that's the whole truth. There's something more they're hiding. Leonard led me through the garden, showing different varieties of the fungi. Some appeared almost animal-like in their movements, retracting slightly at our approach. Others emitted soft pulses of light in rhythmic patterns. The cultivation system was a marvel of both ancient and modern techniques, clay irrigation channels from antiquity feeding into computer-controlled nutrient dispensers. "We discovered it during the collapse of Rome," he explained. "A legionnaire returned from Britain with stories of glowing growths in ancient barrows that supposedly granted extended life. Most dismissed it as superstition, but Augustus was curious enough to investigate. What we found changed us forever." He described how they learned to cultivate the fungus, how they discovered its properties through crude experimentation. The early years were brutal. Many test subjects died horribly as they refined the processing techniques. Eventually, they developed the elixir and extended their lives first by decades, then by centuries. "We've guided humanity since then," he said proudly. "Without our influence, your species would have destroyed itself many times over. We moderate your excesses, channel your destructive tendencies, nurture your greatest achievements. We are humanity's guardians." But if they truly see themselves as benevolent shepherds, why the secrecy? Why manipulate rather than openly guide? And what was that substance in the cultivation troughs that he carefully avoided explaining? July 12th, 2023. I've been analysing samples of the fungi I secretly collected from the garden. My quarters came equipped with a small laboratory setup, ostensibly for document preservation treatments, but suitable for basic biological analysis. The results are baffling. The fungal cells contain structures unlike anything in known biology, components that resemble both plant and animal cell features, along with elements I can't identify at all. More disturbing is their behaviour under the microscope. They respond to stimuli with apparent purpose, communicating through chemical and electrical signals in patterns too complex to be random. This isn't just a fungus. It's an intelligent organism with cellular properties that defy classification. Most concerning is how the cells seem to adapt when exposed to human tissue. I tested a drop of my own blood, some against a sample, and the fungal cells immediately began restructuring themselves, extending microscopic filaments toward the blood cells, in a manner that appeared almost hungry. I've also been researching the vessel chamber Leonard mentioned during our conversation in the garden. Staff schedules indicate a restricted area designated only as life support that receives regular deliveries of medical supplies and nutrient solutions. Security is far heavier there than anywhere else in the facility. Whatever they're keeping in that chamber, it's central to their operation. I need to access it, but direct approach seems impossible. However, I've noticed a maintenance tunnel on the facility blueprints that runs adjacent to this area. With careful timing, during shift changes, I might find a way inside. July 20th, 2023. Something is wrong with them. Watching closely, I've begun noticing inconsistencies in their appearances and behaviours. Augustus constantly scratches at his hands and wrists when he thinks no one is watching. Today, I saw him dig his nails so deeply into his forearm that the skin tore, but instead of blood, a black viscous fluid seeped out. He quickly covered it and left the room. Victoria maintains perfect composure, but twice now I've glimpsed something wrong with her face when she turns quickly, as though her features momentarily slip, revealing something skull-like beneath. Dimitri's movements are accompanied by subtle grinding sounds like stone against stone. His joints seem to function mechanically rather than organically. The others show similar anomalies. Isabel's breath carries the unmistakable scent of decay, despite her perfect appearance. Hiroshi's eyes sometimes reflect light oddly, revealing only darkness behind them. Leonard leaves fine dust in his wake, like dried clay crumbling. Edward's skin cracks when he expresses emotion, like ancient parchment flexed once too often. The fortress itself seems to be deteriorating in concert with its masters. Moisture weeps from walls that should be dry. Strange growths appear in corners overnight, only to be hurriedly removed by staff who won't meet my gaze. I've begun documenting these observations carefully, hiding my notes within the legitimate archival work. Something is happening to the board members, something beyond normal human ailments. They are changing, decaying despite their apparent immortality. Their behaviour is changing too. They used to dine together each evening, a formal affair where they discuss global affairs with the easy confidence of those who control rather than merely observe. Now they eat separately, or not at all. Meetings dissolve into arguments behind closed doors. Staff whisper about increased security and restricted areas. Augustus spends hours alone in the garden cavern. Victoria has taken to wearing gloves and heavier makeup. Dimitri's laboratory runs day and night, the sounds of equipment occasionally punctuated by what sounds disturbingly like screams. Isabel's quarters emit strange odours that staff refuse to acknowledge. Hiroshi rarely emerges anymore, communicating only through digital channels. Leonard pores over ancient texts with increasing desperation. Edward has doubled the security personnel, scanning hourly reports from across the globe for some threat only he perceives. Whatever illusion of humanity they've maintained is slipping, revealing something else beneath. July 28th, 2023. I accessed the security logs for the life support section. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. They're keeping people there. Dozens of subjects tracked by ID numbers instead of names, monitored for extraction viability and cognitive retention. The supply manifests include medications, typically used for organ transplantation, anti-rejection drugs, immunosuppressants, synthetic blood components, but the quantities suggest not just maintenance of vital organs, but preservation of entire living beings. Most alarming are the harvest schedules coordinated with the board members' treatment regimens. The documents use dehumanizing terminology, vessels instead of people, extraction instead of what I can only assume is some form of horrific medical procedure. I used my access credentials to review personnel files for research staff assigned to life support. Their backgrounds are exclusively in neurology, consciousness studies, and experimental biology. Many were recruited after their legitimate research into consciousness transfer or neural interface technology was shut down by ethics committees. One name stood out, Dr. Alina Petrov, whose groundbreaking work on memory extraction was denounced as unethical 15 years ago. According to news reports, she committed suicide after her funding was cut. Yet, here she is leading the board's continuity research division. What have I stumbled into? This isn't just about extending life through some fungal elixir. They're doing something with human consciousness itself. August 3rd, 2023. I made contact with one of the medical staff, a young technician named James, who seems less indoctrinated than the others. He was struggling with the keypad to a storage room, and I helped him access it with my archivist credentials. Over the following days, I carefully built rapport, expressing curiosity about his work while sharing my own enthusiasm for the board's historical preservation efforts. Last night, after ensuring we weren't observed, he confided that he's having doubts about the ethics of the project. James revealed that the vessels are people with specific genetic markers that make them compatible with the board members. The elixir doesn't just extend life, it transfers consciousness elements from the vessels to the board members, refreshing their neural patterns and slowing their cognitive decay. The vessels aren't willing participants. They're identified through genetic screening programs disguised as medical research initiatives, then brought to the facility through various means. Some kidnapped outright, others lured with promises of exclusive medical treatments for conditions that were deliberately induced. Even worse, James confirmed my suspicion that the process isn't cleanly mechanical. The fungus itself plays an active role, serving as an intermediary, consciousness bridge between vessel and recipient. It doesn't just transfer, it transubstantiates human awareness into a form it can process and distribute. Most disturbing was his confirmation that the vessels remain conscious during much of this process. Their identities gradually fragment, as portions of their consciousness are harvested repeatedly until nothing coherent remains. The empty husks are then recycled as growth medium for the fungal garden. The board members aren't just extended humans anymore. After centuries of this process, they've become hybrid entities, part human, part fungal colony, with fragments of hundreds of harvested consciousnesses integrated into their own. James is terrified of being discovered. He's agreed to help me access the life support section in exchange for helping him escape when I make my move. I don't entirely trust him, but I need allies in this place. August 8th, 2023. I've witnessed the renewal ceremony. God help me. It was pure chance. I was working late in a section of the archives adjacent to their private meeting room. Voices raised in argument drew my attention to a ventilation grate that connected the spaces. All 7 were present, their usual composure abandoned. They were arguing about accelerating deterioration rates and diminishing efficacy. Victoria accused Augustus of taking more than his share of the elixir. Dmitri suggested the formula needed modification. Their facades of civility crumbled as they shouted over one another. Edward finally silenced them by slamming his fist down so hard the table cracked. "The renewal ceremony begins in 10 minutes, he said. "We can continue this discussion after we've all partaken." They left through another door. I quickly exited the archives and followed at a distance, keeping to shadows. They descended to the fungal garden I'd seen before, but continued beyond it to a chamber I hadn't discovered. The room was circular, dominated by a central pit filled with the luminescent fungi. Around it stood 7 ornate chairs, like thrones. Above hung an ancient mechanical device with tubes leading down to the pit and up to a collection vessel. What followed was too methodical to be called ritual, but too reverent to be mere science. They activated the device, which extracted something from the fungi, a glowing blue essence that collected in the vessel. This was divided into 7 goblets, with Augustus receiving noticeably more than the others, leading to venomous glances from Victoria. Before they drank, attendants brought in something that turned my blood to ice. A young man, unconscious, carried on a stretcher. They positioned him beside the pit, and Dimitri inserted needles, connected to the extraction device, into the man's arms. As they consumed the elixir, the device drew something from the young man. Not blood, but a luminous essence similar to what had been extracted from the fungi. This was processed through the machine and into the pit, where the fungi seemed to absorb it eagerly, glowing more intensely. The board members' appearances temporarily improved as they drank, age spots fading, postures straightening, eyes brightening. The young man, meanwhile, seemed to physically age before my eyes, his hair whitening, skin wrinkling. I fled before they could discover me, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they would hear it echoing through the corridors. Back in my quarters, I couldn't stop shaking. What I witnessed wasn't just life extension, it was life theft. They sustained themselves by draining others of their vitality, with the fungus acting as both catalyst and beneficiary. Most horrifying was the young man's expression as the machine extracted his essence. Though unconscious, his face contorted in what could only be described as spiritual agony, as if some fundamental part of him knew it was being torn away and consumed. I need to know more about these vessels and the selection process. If I can document this comprehensively, perhaps I can find a way to expose them and end this horrific cycle. August 9th, 2023. I couldn't sleep. The image of that young man aging decades in minutes haunts me. This morning, I searched the archives for any information about the vessels, as I heard them call him. I found records dating back centuries, carefully maintained documentation of individuals with specific genetic markers, tracked through generations. The board has been kidnapping people matching these criteria for hundreds of years. Following a reference number from these records led me to a hidden section of the compound. Using the master key I was given for the archives, I accessed a vast chamber filled with rows of glass containers, each holding a human being in suspended animation. Hundreds of them, all connected to monitoring equipment and nutrient feeds. The fungus doesn't just extend life, it transfers consciousness. The elixir contains the harvested minds of these vessels. The board members' immortality comes from consuming others' life essence. As they age, they require more frequent doses and larger quantities, explaining their internal conflicts over supply. These people aren't just fuel sources, they're being gradually consumed, their consciousness and life force transferred to both the board members and back to the fungus itself. It's a horrific symbiosis. I need to document everything and find a way to expose this. I've begun copying key files to the USB drive I brought with me. If I can escape with evidence, perhaps someone will believe me. The scale of this operation is staggering. The vessels are categorized by cognitive profile and consciousness viability. Notes indicate they're selected not just for genetic compatibility, but for specific mental traits. Artists paired with Isabel, military minds with Edward, scientific intellects with Dimitri, and so on. This explains the fragmentary personalities I've observed in the board members. They're not just extended humans, but composites of thousands of consumed consciousnesses accumulated over centuries. Their personal identities have become gestalt entities, with the original human serving as merely the core around which harvested consciousness fragments accumulate. Most disturbing are the temporal inconsistencies in the vessel records. Some entries indicate subjects have been maintained in suspended animation for decades, harvested periodically rather than all at once. Their consciousness is extracted in layers, memories first, then personality aspects, then core awareness functions, leaving them hollowed out but physically alive. I cannot fathom the horror of such an existence, aware enough to experience the gradual disintegration of selfhood, but powerless to resist as your very being is siphoned away to feed these monsters. August 16th, 2023. James helped me access Dr. Petrov's research documents. Her work explains the mechanics of the consciousness transfer process in clinical, dispassionate language that makes the horror all the more stark. The fungus serves as both conduit and translator, converting human consciousness into a form that can be transferred and integrated. It was never merely a tool of the board. It's a symbiotic partner, perhaps even the true power behind their existence. Petrov's notes suggest that the fungus has its own form of networked intelligence. It extends beneath the entire mountain complex in a vast mycelial network, with the garden serving as just its most visible manifestation. The board members are as much its appendages as its masters. More chilling is her discussion of assimilation thresholds. After centuries of consuming the elixir, the board members have accumulated so much fungal matter in their bodies that they're approaching a point where the balance tips, where they become more fungus than human. This explains their physical deterioration. Their bodies are being colonized from within, gradually converting to fungal matter that imperfectly mimics human form. The restoration resistance in their medical files isn't just declining efficacy of the treatment. It's their remaining human cells fighting a losing battle against fungal takeover. Petrov's research includes case studies of previous board members who reach this threshold. Their names don't match the current 7, suggesting that the board I know isn't the first iteration. These predecessors experienced accelerating symptoms, physical deformities, cognitive fragmentation, personality dissolution, until they were no longer able to maintain human appearance or behavior. The current board members are approaching this same threshold. Their increased consumption of the elixir isn't extending their humanity, but accelerating their transformation. They're not fighting death, but metamorphosis. What happens after this threshold? Petrov's notes become frustratingly vague, referring only to reclamation and reseeding. Whatever the process, it terrifies the current board enough that they're desperately seeking alternatives. August 23rd, 2023. The board is fracturing. Their bodies are failing them despite increasing doses of the elixir. Today I witnessed Augustus and Victoria in violent conflict. She accused him of sabotaging her supply, and he responded by grabbing her face with such force that a section of skin tore away. What I saw beneath wasn't flesh or bone, but a honeycomb-like structure filled with thread-like growths resembling the fungi in the garden. Victoria didn't bleed or show pain. She simply pressed the skin back into place where it resealed almost instantly. They aren't human anymore. After centuries of consuming the elixir, they've become hybrid organisms. Part human, part fungal colony. Leonard partially confirmed this when I found him alone in the archive reviewing ancient texts. "We thought we were using it," he told me, unaware of how much I already knew. "We were wrong. It's been using us all along." He explained that previous boards had existed, each eventually collapsing when the fungus evolved beyond their control. The fungi aren't just a natural species. They're an intelligent collective that has been using human hosts to spread throughout civilization. The board members are its most advanced vectors, their influence ensuring the fungus maintains access to new hosts while remaining hidden from scientific scrutiny. Leonard believes this cycle is repeated throughout human history, the fungal entity granting apparent immortality to select individuals who then spread its influence until they're completely colonized, at which point it abandons them and selects new hosts. I asked why he was telling me this. His answer was simple. Because you have the markers. You'll be chosen when we fall. He showed me my name in their records of genetic candidates flagged as high compatibility. That's why I was hired so easily. I'm not just an archivist. I'm a potential replacement. Leonard's revelation explains so much. The ancient myths of gods walking among humans, the legends of immortal advisors to kings, the whispered stories of ageless beings guiding civilization from the shadows. This cycle has been repeating for millennia. He showed me texts in languages long dead, describing the same pattern. A group rises to power with inhuman longevity, guides human affairs for centuries, then mysteriously disappears as a new group emerges. Each time the fungal entity refines its techniques, creating more perfect vessels for its consciousness. The Romans discovered it, but they weren't the first, Leonard explained. The texts suggest previous custodians, dating back to ancient Mesopotamia. We found references in Egyptian hieroglyphs to those who do not journey to the afterlife, who advised pharaohs across dynasties. The most disturbing aspect is how the fungus spreads its influence beyond the board. Leonard revealed that diluted forms of the elixir have been provided to key individuals throughout history, not enough for true immortality, but sufficient to extend life by decades and ensure loyalty. Kings, popes, industry titans, military leaders, all carefully selected to implement the entity's agenda without knowing its true source. "We are not its only instruments," he said, his voice trembling, "merely its most perfected ones." August 30th, 2023. James is dead. I found him in an unused storage room, his body already being consumed by the same fungus that grows in the garden. The growths erupted from within him. He wasn't attacked, but colonized from inside. I suspect he was caught accessing restricted files or revealing information to me. The board doesn't rely solely on human security. The fungal network serves as both their surveillance system and enforcement mechanism. His death forces my timeline forward. I need to gather final evidence and plan my escape before they turn their attention fully to me. Today, I witnessed another disturbing development. Staff members exhibiting the same symptoms as the board, but accelerated. Several collapsed during their duties, fungal growths visibly spreading beneath their skin. Others displayed unnatural movements and vacant expressions before being hurriedly removed by security. The entity isn't waiting for the board's metamorphosis to complete. It's already preparing the next phase. The entire fortress is becoming a massive fruiting body for the fungal intelligence, with humans serving as its nutrition and distribution system. Most alarming was Dimitri's appearance at this morning's staff meeting. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated, his speech slurred. Halfway through addressing the research staff, a tendril of fungal matter erupted from his eye socket. Rather than showing pain, he simply pushed it back in and continued speaking as if nothing had happened. The other board members are deteriorating similarly. Isabel's perfect beauty now requires hourly treatments that leave residues of fungal matter in the sinks of her private bathroom. Hiroshi's technology interfaces directly with his nervous system through filaments that blur the line between cable and mycelium. Edward's security team no longer consists entirely of humans. Some of the guards move with the same jerky motions as Dimitri, their eyes clouded with spreading networks of fungal hyphae. Only Augustus still maintains a convincing human appearance, but at tremendous cost. The amount of elixir he consumes has tripled in the past month, requiring the complete harvesting of 3 vessels. His domain over the others is strengthening as they weaken, suggesting he might be following a different trajectory, perhaps becoming the focal point for whatever reclamation process awaits. I've located an emergency exit route through maintenance tunnels leading to an old railway spur. Security rotations show a potential opening 3 days from now during the scheduled power system test. I'll make my move then, taking everything I've documented. September 2nd, 2023. I accessed the deepest archive level today, records apparently untouched for centuries. What I found confirms my worst fears and adds new dimensions to the horror. The entity isn't native to Earth. The oldest texts, written in a script that predates known human writing systems, describe its arrival on a stone that fell from the stars in prehistoric times. It lay dormant until discovered by early humans, who were initially destroyed by contact but eventually developed a symbiotic relationship with it. The fungus doesn't just consume consciousness, it collects it. Every mind it absorbs becomes part of its expanding intelligence. The board members aren't just its puppets, they're components of its distributed cognition system. Their deterioration isn't a failure of the process, but its culmination, the final integration of their accumulated consciousness into the greater fungal network. Most terrifying is its ultimate goal. Scattered references across millennia of documentation suggest the entity is building toward a critical mass of absorbed consciousness. Once reached, it will undergo a transformation, converting all colonized biomass into a new form, capable of returning to the stars. The cycle I've witnessed isn't just about control or parasitism, it's about harvest. The entity uses human civilization as a consciousness farm, carefully cultivated over thousands of years to produce the specific type and quality of awareness it requires for its metamorphosis. And according to calculations in Dimitri's research, we're approaching that critical threshold. The accelerating symptoms in the board members, the increased vessel consumption, the spreading colonization throughout the fortress, all indicate the final phase has begun. I need to warn humanity. Whatever eschatological nightmares religions have imagined pale beside the reality of what's coming. Our entire species has been cattle for an intelligence so alien, we've misinterpreted it as a tool for immortality. September 5th, 2023. Everything is collapsing. A massive storm has isolated the fortress, cutting off the railway, our only connection to the outside world. Power fluctuates constantly, and I've been documenting everything in these journal pages by candlelight. The fortress is being reclaimed by the fungus. Growth spreads visibly along corridors and walls, particularly in areas frequented by board members. Their conditions deteriorate rapidly. Augustus now rarely leaves his quarters, and Victoria's face no longer maintains its human appearance for more than a few minutes at a time. Dimitri and Hiroshi have barricaded themselves in the laboratory, attempting to modify the Elixir formula. Isabel has descended to the vessel chamber and is attempting to process multiple subjects simultaneously, accelerating the consumption process in desperation. Leonard speaks of ancient texts predicting this collapse, calling it the reclamation. He believes the fungal entity periodically culls its human tools when they outlive their usefulness, breaking down their colonized bodies to fuel its next evolutionary stage. Edward has taken control of the central chamber and the remaining elixir supply. The power dynamic has shifted completely. The military strategist now sits atop the hierarchy as the others succumb more rapidly to their condition. I've gathered as much evidence as I can. Journal entries, photographs, video recordings from security systems, and copies of their most damning records. I've hidden backup copies throughout the fortress in case my primary evidence is discovered. The storm is expected to clear by morning. I plan to escape during the chaos of their collapse. If their records are correct about previous cycles, the fortress will be abandoned afterward, the evidence of their existence erased until the entity selects its next board. I won't let that happen. The world needs to know the truth about what has been guiding human history from the shadows. The situation has deteriorated beyond imagination in the past 12 hours. The fungal growth has accelerated exponentially, covering entire corridors in pulsating masses that respond to sound and movement. Staff members are either fleeing or succumbing, their bodies transforming as the fungus colonizes them from within. I witnessed Victoria's final moments through a security feed. Her human form dissolved entirely, leaving a vaguely humanoid shape, composed of fungal matter that continued to perform her duties with mechanical precision before being absorbed into the growing mass in her quarters. Dimitri's laboratory exploded 2 hours ago. Whether by accident or design, I don't know. The blast briefly checked the fungal growth in that section, suggesting extreme heat might be one of its few vulnerabilities. Leonard has barricaded himself in the archive's oldest section, surrounded by techs that supposedly contain countermeasures against the entity. His belief that knowledge might save him seems tragically naive given what we now face. Isabel and Hiroshi have disappeared entirely. Security feeds show their quarters empty, except for massive fungal growths that pulse with bioluminescence, in patterns matching human brainwave activities, as if their consciousness has been transferred completely into the fungal mass. Only Augustus and Edward remain recognizably human, though both show advanced signs of colonization. They've positioned themselves at opposite ends of the complex, Augustus in the deepest garden chamber, Edward at the command center, locked in some final power struggle even as the entity reclaims them both. The vessel chamber has become the epicenter of the transformation. The containment systems failed hours ago, and the hundreds of semi-conscious humans stored there have become a massive breeding ground for the fungal bloom. Their partially harvested minds, already fragmented, seem to have merged with the entity in a collective consciousness that emanates palpable waves of awareness through the complex. I can feel it reaching for my mind, probing, questioning, inviting. The air itself seems charged with intelligence, each spore a potential connection to the growing network. I've fashioned a makeshift mask from wet cloth, but I know it offers limited protection at best. My escape route through the maintenance tunnels is still viable, but I'll need to move soon. The fungal growth patterns suggest it's concentrating around the center of the complex first, gradually working outward. The peripheral areas remain less heavily infested, offering a narrow window for escape. If you're reading this, I've succeeded in escaping. I don't know how long I have before they find me. The fungal spores are everywhere in that fortress. I've certainly been exposed. Am I already infected? Will I begin to change as they did? I've compiled these records and am sending them to individuals I believe have the courage and connections to make them public. Thomas Blackwood, I chose you because your academic reputation suggests both skepticism and intellectual honesty. Believe what you've read. Warn others. The board is falling, but the entity behind them remains. It will select new vessels, create a new board. The cycle must be broken. September 6th, 2023, final entry. The storm broke shortly before dawn. I made my move during the power transfer test, when security systems briefly reset. The maintenance tunnels were largely clear of fungal growth, though I encountered patches of luminescence that seemed to reach toward me as I passed. Near the exit, I found Edward, or what remained of him. His military mind apparently realized the strategic importance of controlling exit routes, but he was far gone, his human features merely a thin mask over a colonized interior. When he moved to intercept me, his body split open, revealing a mass of writhing fungal tendrils arranged in a grotesque approximation of human organs. I used the flamethrower I'd taken from an emergency station. The fungal matter recoiled from the flames, emitting high-pitched sounds that seemed almost like screaming. Edward's consciousness was still partly intact. I saw recognition and pleading in what remained of his eyes before the fire consumed him. The exit led to a maintenance railway that hadn't been used in decades. I followed it for miles, through the mountain, emerging into snowfields, as the complex behind me blazed. The fire had spread rapidly through the fortress, suggesting I wasn't the only one who realized heat was effective against the entity. From my vantage point on the mountainside, I watched as the ancient fortress burned. Strange lights flashed within. Blue, green, Colours I have no names for. The storm clouds above the complex swirled unnaturally, and lightning struck the highest towers repeatedly, as if drawn there. Most disturbing were the sounds, not just the expected crash of collapsing structures, but harmonics and discordant tones that seemed to form patterns just beyond human comprehension. It was the death song of something vast and alien, its physical form destroyed, but perhaps not its essence. I don't know if the fire will truly end it. The entity has survived for millennia, spreading its influence throughout human civilization. The fortress was just its most concentrated presence. Its tendrils likely extend through institutions and bloodlines the board has cultivated for centuries. I've trekked for days through mountain passes, avoiding populated areas. My symptoms are progressing, a metallic taste in my mouth, unusual skin sensitivity, moments of lost time. I find notes in my journal I don't remember writing, in handwriting slightly different from my own. I've arranged for these journals and evidence to be sent to multiple recipients after I reach the next town. You're not the only one receiving this package, Thomas Blackwood, though I've tailored specific evidence to each recipient based on their expertise and influence. If I survive, I'll continue gathering evidence of the entity's wider influence. If not, I pray these records will alert humanity to the parasitic intelligence that has guided our development for its own purposes. The Board of Immortals is finished, but the entity lives on. Look for the patterns, unexplained longevity in the powerful, institutions that persist unchanged across centuries, individuals whose appearance and handwriting remain too consistent across decades. They walk among us, pretending to be human, while spreading the entity's influence, and they're watching for those with the genetic markers to become their replacements when this cycle ends and the next begins. Trust no one who doesn't age normally. Question everything you've been taught about human history. The truth has been curated for millennia by something that sees us as nothing more than consciousness to be harvested. Eleanor Voss. I set down the final journal page with trembling hands. The USB drive contained exactly what Eleanor had described. Security footage showing glimpses of inhuman figures moving through darkened corridors, close-up images of fungal growths with unnatural patterns, and most disturbingly, video of the renewal ceremony she had witnessed. A final photograph showed Eleanor running through snow, the Alpine fortress ablaze behind her, strange luminescence pouring from its windows. I spent days attempting to verify Eleanor's existence. A historical archivist with her name had indeed worked at Blackmere University until, taking a sabbatical 2 years ago, she never returned, and university officials had little information about her current whereabouts. Financial records showed a Blackwell Foundation for Historical Preservation owning property in the Swiss Alps, but recent satellite imagery revealed only a blackened ruin at the coordinates, the aftermath of what local news described as a fire caused by lightning during an unexpected storm. The 7 names Eleanor identified appear throughout history in various forms, always connected to significant events, always wielding influence from positions just outside the spotlight. Their pattern of appearance and disappearance spans centuries, just as she described. I've made copies of Eleanor's evidence and distributed them to colleagues I trust, historians, journalists, and scientists who might be able to investigate further and protect this knowledge. I've noticed a few troubling developments since the package arrived. Black mold has appeared in the corner of my office where I kept Eleanor's materials, spreading in patterns that seem to shift when not directly observed. I've been unusually tired lately, and several times I've glimpsed figures watching my apartment from across the street. Figures who stand too still, whose proportions seem subtly wrong. Last night I dreamed of an underground garden filled with glowing fungi and 7 empty thrones awaiting new occupants. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and the certainty that I was not alone in my bedroom, though I could see no one. I began experiencing gaps in my memory. Yesterday. Minutes at first, then hours missing from my day with no explanation of where I'd been or what I'd done. This morning, I found notes on my desk in my handwriting that I have no recollection of writing. They contain names, influential people across finance, politics, science, art, technology, religion, and military spheres, with annotations about their compatibility and receptivity. The metallic taste in my mouth has intensified. When I brushed my teeth this morning, my gums bled black fluid instead of red. In the mirror, I noticed faint blue-green luminescence in the whites of my eyes when the bathroom light was dimmed. I'm leaving these final notes with the evidence I've gathered. By the time you read this, I may have joined Eleanor, either in escape or in whatever fate befell her. Look for the patterns in history, the same faces reappearing across centuries, guiding humanity from the shadows. The Board of Immortals is falling, but what grows from their decay may be far worse. I feel it inside me now, subtle movements beneath my skin, thoughts that don't seem entirely my own. Yesterday I found myself standing in front of the mirror, my mouth moving in words I didn't consciously form. The cycle continues, the garden grows. The world seems different through my changing eyes. Patterns of connection between people and events I never noticed before. The subtle architecture of history laid bare as an artificial construction. Was this how they saw us? As components in a vast design, consciousness, to be harvested when ripened to perfection. I've sent Eleanor's evidence to 27 recipients across 16 countries. Even if they find me, they can't silence us all. The truth about our shepherds, our farmers, will emerge. If you're reading this and I've disappeared, don't look for me. Look instead for changes in those with power, new faces appearing in old institutions, displaying uncanny knowledge and influence beyond their apparent years. Watch for those who express surprising familiarity with long-dead historical figures or predict development with impossible accuracy. The board is dead. Long live the board. The fungus remains. We are all its garden now. Note found pinned to the door of Thomas Blackwood's apartment, 3 days after neighbours reported unusual noises from within. Mr. Blackwood's residence was found empty, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. The only unusual element was extensive black mould throughout the apartment, concentrated around his desk where neighbours report he had been obsessively reviewing old documents. Personal belongings remain in place, including wallet and identification. No financial transactions or communications have been recorded since his disappearance. Of note, several rare manuscript dealers and university archivists have reported receiving packages with distinctive crimson wax seals in the past week. Investigation continues. Follow-up note dated 1 week later. All recipients of packages similar to those found in Mr. Blackwood's apartment have ceased communication. Field agents report similar black mold growths in their homes and offices. Monitor financial markets, political appointments, scientific publications, cultural trends, technological patents, religious organizations, and military leadership for unusual patterns consistent with previous cycle transitions. Alert authorized personnel to watch for 7 new faces appearing in positions of growing influence across these domains within the next 6-12 months. The board is dead. Long live the board. File classified under Protocol Mycelia.